The committee will come to order. The movement of personal communications to mobile services is dramatic and accelerating. Just this week, it was announced that for the first time, the number of homes having only a cell phone and no landline service now exceeds the number of homes having only a landline and no cellular service. Daily, new, attractive, and useful applications are coming to wireless services, and data rates continue to increase, ensuring that consumers can obtain faster access to mobile applications. Today, the subcommittee is beginning its examination of possible ways in which federal telecommunications policy may be adjusted in light of these developments, with the goal of enhancing the consumer experience and facilitating the future growth of mobile services. Our goal is to develop on a bipartisan basis legislation that will make timely needed policy changes respecting mobile services, and as we construct the measure, we intend to consult with both consumer representatives and cellular telephone companies. This morning, we begin that process by surveying possible areas in which policy changes may be needed. Today, most Americans can choose among wireless service providers that offer a truly nationwide service. It's not uncommon for people to live in one state, work in another state, and travel to many other states, all while using their cellular telephones. These consumers expect and deserve the same useful features and quality of service to be provided no matter where in our nation they may be using mobile services. Today, state governments have authority over consumer protection for wireless services, including such matters as customer billing information and practices. With a highly mobile nation using an inherently mobile service with a truly national footprint, I think it's hard to argue that for millions of mobile users, one state's consumer protection standards are particularly relevant to that user to the exclusion of others. The mobile industry presents a compelling example where a uniform national set of consumer protection standards would be more relevant to today's patterns of living, work, and travel. In exchange for meaningful national standards, the states would be preempted from standard setting, but as a practical matter should have a role in dispute resolution and standard enforcement. Another clear need is for the identification of additional spectrum that can be made available in the future for commercial wireless services. As more people use wireless devices and as advanced applications require ever higher data rates, over time additional spectrum will be needed in order to accommodate projected growth. Our legislation should direct that NTIA undertake a survey of possible new spectrum that could be auctioned in the future for that future growth. Other possible subjects of interest may include modifications to the rules relating to cellular tower siting, particularly where the application is to place transmitters on existing structures that already have transmitters attached. We should also examine whether the rules relating to roaming agreements should include data as well as voice services, which are covered by roaming agreement requirements presently. We should examine whether policy adjustments are needed to assure the adequate availability of backhaul in order to accommodate the growing volume of cellular traffic, and whether any policy adjustment is appropriate to assure that the newest handsets are available to a wider group of cellular providers. And one relevant question would be whether a wider use of the requirements that the Commission imposed last year on the auction of the C Block could be a creative and perhaps helpful way of addressing that need. The testimony of today's witnesses on these and other legislative avenues we may consider pursuing will be very welcome, and I want to say thank you to our witnesses for taking part in our discussion this morning. Members will note the presence at the table of a variety of consumer representatives, and also cellular telephone companies. Perhaps members have noted the absence of the two largest cellular telephone providers, AT&T and Verizon, from our conversation today. I want to note that invitations were extended to both of those carriers. Both wanted to attend, but the witnesses who they wanted to testify were not available because of other previously scheduled company events that required those witnesses' attendance. And both companies have been invited to submit their comments for this record, and I do anticipate their being a part of the record of today's hearing accordingly, and also being a part of any future conversations that we have on the subject of structuring provisions for legislation addressing mobile services. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking Republican member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, for his opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. As you pointed out, the wireless industry has become one of the fastest growing and most competitive sectors of the United States economy because Congress has allowed consumers to rule the market. Now, the way in which consumers use wireless services varies widely from person to person, and thus, obviously, we should resist imposing a one-size-fits-all regulation that would likely reduce choice and innovation. The industry has transformed from an all-analog duopoly to almost all-digital multi-carrier industry, where consumers can choose from 4 national providers and over 100 regional or local providers with a variety of plans and devices at a range of prices to meet the consumer's needs. Indeed, more than 99% of the consumers have 1 or more wireless carriers to choose from, while 90% have 4 or more choices. So obviously consumers are the big winners here. Between 1993 and 2008, the cost per minute has dropped to 4 cents from 44 cents, and the number of wireless subscribers increased from 11 million to 270 million, an increase of over 2,000%. Wireless technology will obviously transform our lives from health and education to banking and transportation. Imagine if an EMT at an accident site can send images of the scene to the ER so that trauma teams can be preparing themselves instantaneously. Or if teachers could stream live video from a zoo instead of reading about animals in an elementary school textbook. Applications in mobile banking could eventually mean that our wireless device will replace our wallet. And airlines are already experimenting with electronic boarding passes that are shipped directly to your handheld wireless device, saving time and saving money. We are only limited by our imagination and, of course, our temptation to regulate. The purpose of this hearing is to focus on a variety of issues, such as handset exclusivity, wireless net neutrality, special access, and maintaining a national regulatory framework. On the issue of handset exclusivity, some say it's anti-competitive and limits consumer choice. However, when the iPhone was introduced, consumers flocked to AT&T, challenging Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint to offer their own improved devices, services, and rate plans to remain competitive. On the other hand, I sometimes hear from constituents that they'd like to use their iPhone on any network that they wish. I hope our witnesses can address both sides of this very complicated issue. Wireless net neutrality is another important issue. I've already expressed concern that wireless net neutrality can jeopardize investments in innovation. This is especially true in the wireless context, since capacity constraints make the need for flexibility and traffic management all that more critical. Also, I hope our witnesses will address special access. In 1999, the FCC allowed limited deregulation of the special access market where providers could demonstrate evidence of competition. Some now argue that the market is no longer competitive and we should consider re-regulating. Both sides assert that the evidence proves their position. If that's the case, then perhaps we need to get all the data and resolve the issue once and for all. Innovation is occurring because carriers are looking for ways to drive usage on their networks in this competitive environment, not because of any government mandates. For example, without any government intervention, the application market is exploding. iPhone users have the choice of more than 35,000 apps, with more than 1 billion downloads in the 9 months that they have been live. It's important to point out that this occurred without a government mandate on AT&T. Therefore, instead of imposing new mandates, we should remove existing regulatory barriers, such as disparate, costly state regulation of service plans and fees. In 1993, we preempted state regulation of wireless rates and entry. That decision has fueled the tremendous growth. Since then, states have created a patchwork of regulations on service and billing practices that threaten their growth. So now is the time to create a national consumer protection framework. And finally, I'd also like to request that the committee start the process of identifying where the next allocation of spectrum for commercial use will come from. These inventory efforts generally have a long life between the start of the process and when the spectrum actually comes to market. Thus, the time to start is before America's carriers are spectrum constrained. Identifying spectrum will help ensure that the U.S. wireless market continues to be the world leader. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding the hearing, and I welcome our witnesses and look forward to their testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, Chairman Emeritus of the Full Energy and Commerce Committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I commend you for holding today's hearing on competition in the wireless industry, a very important subject. Although the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, recognizes the United States as having one of the most competitive wireless industries in the industrialized world, the continued consolidation of that industry in this country behooves us to remain vigilant in ensuring robust wireless competition. Indeed, the fact that the two largest domestic carriers, AT&T and Verizon, control 60% of the market alone, naturally leads one to question the veracity of several conclusions reached in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau January 16, 2009 report. Most notably, that consumers continue to reap significant benefits from competition in the commercial mobile radio services, CMRS, marketplace. As you are all aware, I've long maintained that greater competition is beneficial to consumers. Today's debate on issues related to handset availability, voice and data roaming, special access must not lose sight of their potential to increase competition in the marketplace. I welcome the opinions of witnesses assembled here today concerning these matters, but I'd like to offer a few observations of my own before engaging in that discussion. With regard to handset availability, I continue to question why a consumer is constrained to using a single particular handset, for example, an iPhone, on only one wireless provider's network. Although I understand this is due to contractual obligations, I wonder if a consumer would not benefit from greater choice in the networks available to his handset. I also wonder what it is that the Congress ought to do about this matter, and clearly this is a matter into which the committee should go today and at other times. Further, given the profusion of so-called smartphones in the marketplace, I feel it is imperative that we expand roaming requirements to include not only voice services, but also data services. And lastly, with regard to special access, I would reiterate my insistence from the 110th Congress that competitive carriers, CLECs, should make the same disclosure about their facilities as must incumbent local exchange carriers, the ILECs. I think this is a very important matter into which the committee should go. I look forward to a lively discussion of these matters and others this morning, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you not only for your courtesy, but for your vigor in addressing these questions. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Chairman Dingell. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 3 minutes. 2 minutes.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Talking about energy up here.
It's a good
Got distracted. Let me just highlight the issue on the competitive nature of the cell phone industry. It is highly competitive. And the simple example I will use is my 2-year contract expired in December. So in my local community, there's a development called Collinsville Crossing, new. And part of that development is part of a strip of buildings. There's like 10 businesses. And as I researched, in 10 of those office sections, 3 are full-time national carriers selling their products. And a 4th one is in the Radio Shack. So what I was able to do was visit 4 competitive cell phone companies within less than 1/10 of a mile. And not only visit them and figure out the deal and their products and their services, but I was able to walk back and forth, comparing prices, comparing models, comparing options, until I found the provider and the equipment that not only I wanted to do at my price, but also that my 16-year-old son wanted. And nowhere else, in no other industry, in that short amount of space, not even in a big mall where you may have 2 wireless carriers, maybe 3 in the little subsections. But this is in Collinsville, Illinois. So I reject the premise that there is not a highly competitive nature to the cell phone industry. It's what makes this committee great, and it's what makes this industry so exciting for conservative capitalist Republicans, because you move too fast for us to regulate, and I'm going to stand to make sure that we don't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimkus. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this extremely important hearing today. Last year, when I chaired the subcommittee, we held a legislative hearing on a draft consumer protection and broadband bill with your support and with the support of many of our colleagues. That draft bill proposed a strong nationwide consumer protection policy for wireless subscribers. It had effective federal and state enforcement, the promotion of community broadband deployment, and a plan for federal agencies to assess their spectrum inventory and utilize frequencies using spectrum-efficient and cost-effective technologies. This last issue holds great promise for future innovation and job creation. And I congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership in this area. The wireless industry has suggested that Congress should preempt states from regulating the terms and conditions of wireless service, as it did over a decade ago with respect to the price for wireless services. Many states have initiated attempts to take action to provide consumer protection policies for their residents, particularly with respect to regulation aimed at wireless contract terms, early termination fees, privacy issues, and others. To the extent that wireless service is by its nature an interstate service, this hearing will provide an opportunity for us to explore whether further preemption is advisable, how consumer protection can be enhanced if regulatory treatment is nationalized, and how best to ensure rigorous enforcement of consumer protection. Since the subcommittee's hearings last year, problems posed by the current marketplace and regulatory structure have persisted, with roaming arrangements among carriers, with a lack of devices available to smaller regional carriers, with respect to portability of devices to other carriers remaining limited or non-existent, with a lack of clarity and uniformity with respect to billing terms and conditions, and an inability for consumers to effectively compare plans, and many consumers sometimes feeling trapped after buying an expensive device or getting locked into long-term contracts with significant penalties for switching. This is a very important hearing. I thank you for your continuing leadership, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Markey, and you did excellent work on this general subject during the last Congress. We are using the legislative draft that you assembled as the foundation for our consideration this year, and I want to thank you and commend you for that outstanding work. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Booyer, is recognized for 2 minutes. The gentleman reserves his time and will have his time added to his question time for this panel. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. In all of my years on this committee and this subcommittee, rather, I've always been concerned with the lack of diversity in competition in the telecommunications market. I have found the lack of diversity in the wireless marketplace to be particularly disturbing because the spectrum used by wireless companies is a public asset owned by all of the American people and not by just these companies. I continue to be dismayed over the fact that women and minority businesses have little, if any, presence in the wireless industry. Given that the market for advanced wireless services is rapidly growing and will likely soon displace traditional wireline telecommunications services, it is vital that we ensure diversity in the market now and not kick the can down the road not for another day. As such, Mr. Chairman, I hope that these fine witnesses who are gathered here can comment on this long-standing interest of mine. And I further hope that with a new administration, we will finally find some public commitment to ensuring that all Americans can partake in the multi-billion-dollar wireless industry. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rush. The gentleman from California, Mr. Radanovich, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing and examining the competition in the wireless industry. I appreciate the effort on this. As co-chair of the Wireless Caucus with Mr. Inslee, I appreciate the opportunity to explore the ways we can work together to ensure that the wireless customers will have the most innovative, best quality services at competitive prices. One area I believe that is hindering effective competition is tower siting. The ability to deploy wireless systems and expand services, thereby increasing competition for customers, relies on the ability to construct and place towers and transmitters. Yet 3,300 wireless siting applications are pending before local jurisdictions awaiting a decision. Approximately 760 have been pending final action for more than a year, while 180 of those have been waiting for more than 3 years. The problem is that the Communications Act is very ambiguous about the time in which a decision on these applications has to be made, requiring only that it be done within a reasonable time frame. This potential for delaying action discourages investment and prevents consumers from receiving the full benefits that come from increased service and competition. I'm sympathetic to the demands on zoning authorities who must be given enough time to properly review these applications. However, this process must have an end to it so that carriers are not continually left wondering whether they will get an answer at all. I look forward to working with the interested parties and the committee towards resolution to this matter, and I'm also aware that there is an effort to have the FCC reset price caps for special access, and I do not believe that this is possible or should be possible until the FCC has all the relevant data on the full scope of high-capacity services. Nevertheless, I'm thrilled that this hearing is taking place and look forward to the testimony from the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Radanovich. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, is recognized for 2 minutes. The gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, Mr. Doyle has just returned and is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. Thanks for holding this hearing. Mr. Chairman, you know, some people who have my cell phone number are very interested in my car. I just want to say for the record, my car warranty is not about to expire. I'm not really happy that they call my cell phone, and I'm not happy that they keep calling me, even though I'm on a do not call list, and even though calling my cell phone is blatantly illegal. And even though I've tried to get on these companies' do not call list, they still keep calling me. So I just want to say, stop doing that. I hope the FTC and the FCC hunt each and every one of you down and make a lesson out of you by interrupting every one of your meals that you eat for the rest of your lives with a telemarketing call. Okay, I feel better now. Now, on to more happy topics. Since we last looked at the wireless industry, we've seen dramatically improved customer service. Consumers generally better understand the contracts they sign and the services that are available to them. That's not to say it's all perfect. In fact, many of us up here have had problems with our bill. And I do agree with those who say that text messages are still priced way above cost. For example, if you were to send enough text messages to fill this 1.5 megabyte floppy diskette at 20 cents a message, you'd have to pay over $2,000. And if you were to send enough text messages to equal the size of an MP3 song, that would cost almost $6,000. But I think most of the companies have improved. One example, Verizon Wireless has successfully sued several companies for illegal telemarketing and text message spam. I'm glad to see that the company and the FTC and the FCC are working on this problem. And I'm glad to see that most of the carriers have clearer bills and prorated contracts. Mr. Chairman, if you decide to move a national framework bill, I look forward to seeing that will give consumers across America peace of mind with a baseline of reliable consumer protections. Thanks for your patience, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this hearing as well. A lot's already been said about the positive competitive nature of the wireless marketplace. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record a Consumer Reports story I found very interesting on this issue, dated January of 2009.
Without objection.
Which our colleagues may find of interest. I'm one of those. I'm one of those people that, has 3 cell phones, Mr. Chairman, one official, one personal, one campaign. And so I get experience on a lot of them. Fortunately, I've not been called about a car warranty yet. I suppose I shouldn't admit that, but I'm not going to give out the number either. But I know that this marketplace has changed dynamically and rapidly in a way that's very positive. As rates have come down, service has been expanded and options have increased. And so I look forward to seeing where we can help this very mature industry move forward and keep the competition going that drives down prices and makes these devices available. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Walden. The gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher, and thank you and Ranking Member Stearns for holding this hearing to examine issues related to wireless competition in our country. The wireless industry has a tremendous impact on the U.S. economy and includes about 600 companies with combined annual revenue of over $110 billion. It's projected that by 2016, this revenue will increase to $427 billion annually. However, some argue that the industry is highly concentrated with 4 national wireless carriers earning about 85% of the industry revenue and 2 controlling 90% of special access. It's important to preserve competition within the wireless industry in order to ensure that consumers, especially in rural areas and places like the U.S. Virgin Islands that I represent, have access to reasonable rates and the best of services. Competitive local exchange carriers, such as the ones testifying today, rely heavily on the incumbents for services like special access, yet they're limited in options for service providers. This inevitably raises prices for the CLECs and makes it difficult for them to remain competitive. Mergers also can pose a significant threat to competition, especially if the conditions are not imposed and then implemented. The wireless industry is thriving and steadily growing at an enormous rate, but for some carriers it's still difficult or virtually impossible to compete in this industry. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on this issue and the recommendations on keeping the industry competitive, and I thank them for being here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christensen. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, has waived his opening statement and will have additional question time added. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to say that I noticed today the same stats that you apparently cited in your opening statement, that for the first time there are more American families with wireless phones than with hardline phones. And we know that all families are really struggling. All American families are really struggling in these very tough economic times. They're looking for any savings that they can in their household budget, and thanks to more competition, providing more spectrum, something that this committee did, lifting many of the burdensome regulations. The costs to families have gone down, and we can congratulate many in this room for seeing that happen. I would just say to Mr. Doyle, who has stepped away, maybe he's listening in the NA room, there is a provision in most contracts, at least with mine. I have 2 teenagers. There is such a provision as an unlimited text message section. I think it's about $4 a month. I would suggest that, as it saved me a lot of money after the first abuse of my son, Stephen. Thank you. Yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Upton. The gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. I'm interested in today's hearing because of how dynamic the industry is. We've seen a tremendous transformation in the last decade or so. I'd like to see that competition continue and want to make sure that federal regulation isn't part of the problem, that it's part of the solution. Right now there does seem to be a consolidation going on in the industry, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say about what that is doing to the competition. In particular, does handset exclusivity or tower siting, or those issues that are part of the problem, or do we need to look at how those are being regulated right now? So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McNerney. The ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I won't take that time. I'm going to submit my full statement for the record. I'm a 3 cell phone person. If you count BlackBerries in my immediate family, there's 7. We contributed to that $75 billion of revenue fairly substantially last year, and we enjoy it. I'm told that there are about 280 million cell phone customers, which is almost 1 per person. This is obviously an industry that is thriving. There is consolidation going on. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We have 2 market participants that each have, I think between them, the top 2 have about 60% of the market. The thing that I would bring to the committee's attention is this issue of states regulating terms and conditions. We did leave that, if you want to call it a loophole, or we left that open several years ago. I think this subcommittee would be wise to take a look at that and see if we do now need to set up a national regulatory framework for terms and conditions that might help continue the growth of the industry that's thriving. And with that, I'm glad we're having a hearing where we're not arguing over free allowances for CO2. So this is a good hearing, and I look forward to listening to our witnesses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barton. We'll have a discussion later on that very
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm afraid of, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll waive my opening.
Thank you, Ms. Castor. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the panel of witnesses. Compared to much of the telecommunications industry, the wireless sector might look like it's wildly competitive. Most consumers actually have some degree of choice for service, unlike the broadband sector where 90% of Americans have 2 or fewer choices for service, or the wireline industry where the choices are largely non-existent. Wireless technologies are bridging some of these gaps and improving the competitive landscape, but there remain major choke points and anti-competitive practices that inhibit true competition and tilt the playing field steeply in favor of a pair of dominant carriers. I think my colleagues are aware of whom I speak, and I'm disappointed that Verizon and AT&T aren't here today. I hope that they'll decide to come in the future. After all, the top 3 wireless firms control nearly 80% of the wireless phone business in America. That's a real stronghold. A particular concern I have in the wireless industry is the market for special access services. Special access is the high-speed middle mile between the internet backbone for wireless phone and data towers, hospitals, banks, retailers, and other medium and large businesses. For wireless carriers, the cost of special access carriage is up to 1/3 of the expense of running a wireless tower. Special access is a significant choke point in the telecommunication system, since Verizon and AT&T control 80 to 90% of the special access market nationwide. In 1999, the FCC moved to deregulate special access, and not surprisingly, with such limited competition, prices have skyrocketed. Recent data indicates that for the 3 large regional bell companies, the rates of return on special access range from 15 to 38%. In 2005, the FCC initiated a proceeding to review special access rates, and 4 years later, the Commission's review is still pending. In November 2006, the GAO issued a report entitled FCC, right here, FCC needs to improve its ability to monitor and determine the extent of competition in dedicated access services. I think Chairman Martin must have missed that one. So I'm pleased that the Senate has finally scheduled the hearings to confirm a new chairman of the FCC. I hope the Commission, and I would urge them to pursue this proceeding aggressively and determine where there's actual competition and fair pricing in this important market. I also want to mention one other important competitive issue in the wireless industry: access to spectrum. In the most recent major auction of wireless spectrum, the 700 megahertz auction last year, 84% of the winning bids went to Verizon and AT&T. Again, it's difficult to see how the wireless sector can be competitive when 2 players dominate in so many respects. There are new entrants trying to break up this dominance, and some of them happily are on the panel today. We look forward to hearing from you. I think another avenue for a disruptive new entrant would be the auction of the AWS-3 spectrum, now lying fallow. So again, I hope the FCC proceeds on this matter. It's been pending for over 2 years, and I hope it'll finally be taken up. So welcome to all of you. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eshoo. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Shadegg, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, other than to thank you for holding this hearing and to thank our witnesses, I'll waive my opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shadegg. The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Stearns, ranking member, and thank you to the witnesses. You know, Vermont is a very rural state and has had some experience trying to deal with some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with as a committee: tower siting, roaming, lack of competition. And most Vermonters are actually pretty pleased with the wireless service that they get. But it's incredibly critical to our economy to have wireless service everywhere. And the Vermont legislature has passed legislation calling on doing whatever it is we can do to extend wireless throughout the state. And our goal is to achieve 90% of coverage. Some of us think it ought to be 100%. And we're in the process of installing tower sites and using some of our barn and silos to actually help us along the way. We're working on streamlining the permitting process for new telecommunication towers and antenna to facilitate reaching our goals. But there are many issues remaining. The cost of wireless backhaul is obviously a big one. Roaming rates are an enormous problem for many of our users. Vermont has not been able to attract the interest of some of these large national carriers to serve some of our most rural areas. So they're kind of skimming the good economic opportunities and ignoring where we need a lot of help. The progress in my state has been largely a result of local efforts. So we would have some significant concern about this balance between a national plan and freezing out the ability of states to actually play a very aggressive role in trying to extend the benefits of wireless to their citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for convening this subcommittee hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welch. Mr. Inslee was here earlier. I don't see him now, and unless he's planning to appear momentarily, we're going to turn to our first panel of witnesses.